It's time for more Konami. We covered their 1980s arcade games a few months back, and that went down very well, so now we're going into the 1990s, specifically the period between 1990 and 1996. As usual, there are a lot of very famous games here, but there are also some very neat titles that may not be so well known. The standard is, as you would expect, extremely high from these guys, seeing as they are amongst the greatest to ever make games for the arcade, with countless classics to their name. There's plenty of titles to cover, so let's not waste any more time. We're off to 1990, and this time, it's war. We kick things off with an absolutely excellent licensed game. Now, I have covered Konami's Aliens arcade a few times already, so I'll keep this one a little brief, but this is Konami's second big game based off a licensed property after TMNT, and it's a proper blaster. It's certainly a lot more brighter than the film when it comes to colour, what with the fluorescent pink aliens and all sorts of other strange non-xenomorphic creations that are kicking about, but it kind of makes for a good accompaniment to the cool as hell Aliens range of toys that Kenner produced a couple of years after this game. This may not have the horror approach that you would find in other Aliens games, but it sure does have the action. We've got our first proper shoot 'em up in the vid next, and it's one of the vertical variety. Here's Lightning Fighters, which is known in Japan as Trigon. This is a perfectly decent if rather unremarkable shoot 'em up for 1990. It's a bit generic, but you do have a range of big bomb style attacks to use as you pick them up, which is neat. Your mileage may vary on this one depending on what version you play. The original Trigon Japanese version is actually harder, seeing as it uses checkpoints and doesn't start you out with any bombs whatsoever, whereas Lightning Fighters starts you right back where you died and always gives you a bomb to use. Usually the Western version of Konami's games end up being the tougher ones, so this is a bit of an exception. Not the greatest shmup in the world, but not exactly a bad one by any stretch. We're kicking off really strong. Our next game is the first in a series of shoot-em-ups that are just, well, absolutely brilliant in execution, in presentation, in the whole lot. It's Parodius. The first arcade Parodius game, although not the first full stop, has a couple of titles. In English, its full title is Parodius From Myth to Laughter, but really this one is best known as either Parodius Da or just simply Parodius. What we have here is kind of a mashup, combining the power-up systems of Gradius with the bells of TwinBee, and then chucking in a bunch of recognisable figures. You can play as either the Vic Viper, TwinBee, Octopus, or Pentaru, the latter of whom was first seen way back in Antarctic Adventure for the MSX, well, his father was anyway, but he's more the main character of Parodius these days. 3 Parodius games made it to the arcades, and in my book all 3 are amongst the arcade's very best shoot-em-ups ever. They are all so joyful, so creative in their levels and how they twist around the classic elements you would expect to see in Gradius or something more serious, technically exceptional in all departments. I find very little bad to say about the Parodius games, really. I love all of them, so this is already going to be up there as one of my favourite titles in this entire video. Here's something not quite as famous. Punk Shot. Back in the 1980s we had the more traditional likes of Double Dribble, but now Punk Shot takes basketball to the streets. 2-on-2 action where there are no rules and you can just punch and foul opponents until the cows come home, stopping any attempt at a dunk or an alley-oop with a well-placed fist to the ribs. Or at least trying to anyway. Yeah, this game is pretty average, really. Graphically it's not too bad, but the game can be a little annoying to play. It's one of those where I kind of wish there were more buttons, because whenever I manage to actually steal a ball after relentlessly button bashing, I usually end up automatically shooting from half court, missing, and giving away possession, because steal and shoot are the same button. This one definitely could have been more entertaining than it actually is, I'm afraid. When it comes to Konami side-scrollers, obviously some big names spring to mind. Why, there's Castlevania, there's Contra, And then there's Surprise Attack. Wait, Surprise Attack? Yes, this is an arcade game from 1990 that's also of the side-scrolling variety, where some sci-fi terrorists have captured a base and you're on a one-man mission to stop them. This isn't a well-known game at all, which is a shame. It's actually very good and a little bit weird as well. This game is a bit more of the walk and shoot variety. You've often got 2 layers of platforms to play with, and the pace is similar to the likes of Rollin' Thunder and Shinobi, but this game will also surprise you a fair bit. Not just with neat surprises like a low gravity section where you're upside down, but also with a bonus quiz between rounds. 'Cause, well, why wouldn't you have a bonus quiz between rounds? It's kind of unconventional like that, but Surprise Attack's gameplay is actually pretty decent, and I would say this one is well worth a go. A relatively unknown and worthy side-scroller. Just a brief interruption to tell you about my book, Arcade Decades, a book filled with information and stories behind 100 classic 80s arcade games, all original photography, and several other sections regarding the companies behind the games and the slang that was used. We're in the final weekend of the campaign now, so there is still time to go to that page and pledge to get your copy. Thank you very much, please do have a look, and back to our regularly scheduled programming. We're now here in 1991. After initially starting out as an arcade game in 1985, the TwinBee series spent the rest of the decade in the home, but the character returned to the arcades in Parodius Da, and now TwinBee finally has his second arcade game proper. This is Detana TwinBee, which translates to It's Here TwinBee, and this got a Western release under the name Bells and Whistles. There shouldn't be much in the way of surprises here. If you like cute-em-ups, then this is one that's been done to an absolute turn. A joy to look at in all departments, particularly animation. Shujiro Hamakawa, who'd made his Konami debut in 1989's Crime Fighters after coming over from the anime world, would start work on TwinBee with this installment, and he would go on to work on every other TwinBee game, as well as some Parodius titles and other games we'll be seeing in this video. Fantastic shooting action. Konami are absolutely smashing it in this department right now, it must be said. Here's another title that's not well known, but is quite novel, Escape Kids. This is a game for up to 4 players, and it's a mix of dashing and racing where you've got single-screen tracks in a similar vein to the likes of Super Sprint and Super Off-Road, but you repeatedly mash the button to run your way around the course, using your super jumps for a short boost whenever possible and trying to barge your opponents out of the way. This is a game that's already very entertaining just in single-player mode, and I can imagine it's even better with a couple of friends. An excellent bit of casual arcade fun, where the winner gets to celebrate the spoils and upgrade their abilities, while losers quite literally get flushed down the toilet. It is certainly a cool little game from the brains who were once behind track and field. And here we have Golfing Greats, which is, well, it's a golf game. This is a golf game with a slightly different control from the usual power bar action you might expect. You've got a bunch of buttons to change things around, such as your clubs or your aim, but the joystick controls the swing, and then you have a button on the joystick which you need to press to time your connection. Ideally, you'll hit a nice shot, especially because there's not a whole lot of leeway, and it's very easy to hack at the ball or even miss it completely. In terms of arcade golf games, Golfing Greats is a nice companion to Incredible Technology's Golden Tee in that they're both trying new things to more accurately replicate the swing of a golf club, but Golden Tee is certainly more successful in this regard both commercially and as an arcade game. This one just ends up being kind of so-so, and I wouldn't pick it over the more conventional likes of Major Title either. There isn't a huge amount to say about this next one. It's a very obscure title indeed, but it is available to us. Mogura Desse is not a commercial game. This is a PCB that would have been used to test out a cabinet, specifically Konami's range of Domi Universal cabs, similar in vein to Sega's Astro City and Taito's Egret lines. You move the crosshair with the stick and use any button you like to hammer the moles back into the holes, with the sole purpose of testing out those buttons to see if they work or not. There are various examples of this sort of uncommercial test game kicking around. Sega and Taito had Dotorikon and Minivaders respectively, simplified takes on Head-On and Space Invaders, while occasionally older arcade games were used for the purpose of testing. It's known that Konami used the age-old Mr. Goemon for this purpose, shipping it out with their Universal cabs. There's some very good sources of info about these test PCBs out there. I'll link to the Beep Game Center article about the few known ones out there in the description. A couple of years ago now, I did a video all about Konami's licensed games, covering the likes of TMNT, Simpsons, X-Men and what have you, and that was a load of fun. However, foolishly, I did miss one of them, and here it is. This is Rollergames, one of the very few roller derby based video games out there, and it's licensed from a short-lived TV show of the same name that still has a cult following to this day. I think this is one of those instances where if you understand roller derby, and especially if you enjoy it, you'll get a lot out of this game. It does seem to be popular in that niche, but I must admit to personally not really understanding how to play this one. I tend to just try and knock the other team out as much as I possibly can, but this doesn't seem to help me out much when it comes to scoring points and getting the win. It's certainly different to a whole lot of arcade games out there, but it's a little lost on me. I'm afraid that roller derby isn't something that had any impact at all here in the UK, so that probably doesn't help. 1 point. 1 point. We've got a lot of big hitters coming up in 1991, and speaking of licensed games, here's Konami's second big licensed beat-em-up, and it's The Simpsons. Again, there's a whole video where I cover this game and others more extensively, but what else can I say about one of my favourite games of all time? Konami's beat-em-ups just get better and better, and this ends up being an amazing representation of a rather early time in the history of America's true first family, one where there's still some more obscure and early characters and presentations kicking about, with a whole load of references that don't just fit the show, but also fit Konami. There's even a Simpsonised aliens cab in the game, which is pretty cool. One of my favourite ever arcade cabinets, one that would be on a shortlist for me to get if I ever had enough space to get one. This is one of the best there is, without a doubt. Also, a big shout out to the Arcade Club in Bury for their customised sit-down version of the game. That is, put bluntly, an absolutely beautiful presentation. No more than this classic deserves. Still the best Simpsons game of all time. And the standard sure doesn't drop for this next one. The legendary 4-player action continues with Sunset Riders, another one of the greatest arcade games ever made. This is Konami's side-scrolling action at its very best, a Wild West-themed title where 4 regulators grab their bandoleros and deliver some true justice to legions of bandits, complete with all manner of stunts. You ride along the cows, you throw the dynamite back, you stop the train from being robbed, and you get the odd kiss in a boudoir to help improve your mood. The game itself is faultless in the side-scrolling action department, something of an evolution from earlier walk-and-shoot games like Rolling Thunder, and the presentation is some of the best that the arcade's ever seen, all-time classic music, and some absolutely legendary bits of speech to seal the deal. One of the very best there is.
Marry me with my money.
3 all-time classic games in a row? Yep. The sequel to TMNT is here, and Turtles in Time is as good a beat-em-up sequel as you'll find in the arcade. Again, as far as TMNT goes, Turtles in Time was basically never topped for years and years, not until the release of Shredder's Revenge. The simple yet effective beat-em-up action that's present in the original title is fully retained here, although there are a couple of more little things added, most famously the ability to throw your enemies directly into the screen. Much like the original, this doesn't exactly have an extensive range of moves, but they aren't needed. What's here is more than enough. Again, the presentation and how successful this is as a Turtles title is what makes everything. Konami are just nailing that in every single title right now, creating some of the best 16-bit arcade games there ever was. Masters of the 68,000. Oh, and it can't be forgotten that they damn near managed to replicate it all for the SNES version either. What a frickin' port that was.
Pizza time!
This might just be the best one of games we've seen in any of these big arcade game vids so far. We've had 3 absolute legends, and now Thundercross 2 is before us. The original Thundercross came out in 1988, adding another string to the big old Konami bow marked horizontal shoot-em-ups filled with awesome gameplay, graphics and music. The sort of bow you would expect the guys who made Scramble and Gradius to have. And Thundercross 2 doesn't exactly reinvent the wheel here, providing more of the same awesome shmup action. The setting is a bit more conventional than the likes of Salamander, as is the power-ups when compared to something like Gradius, but the action itself is exceptional. It's doing what it does damn well, and the music in particular is a big standout, just as it was in the first Thundercross. This game, at least officially, didn't come out outside of Japan until relatively recently, when it got an Arcade Archives release, and it's highly recommended. Holy hell, 5 classic games in a row? Yep. We're coming to the end of 1991, and here's Vendetta. In Japan, this is known as Crime Fighters 2, but the Western name is probably the more famous one. Vendetta is another 4-player stunner of a beat-em-up, one where you've got another group of tough hombres looking to take out the big old criminal gang. Even by 1991, this sort of setting for a beat-em-up might be very cliché indeed, but it doesn't matter a jot when the gameplay is so damn good. Vendetta is perhaps a little more complex than the likes of TMNT and Simpsons, with a big difference between the characters and their moves, whether you go speedy with someone like Boomer, or pick Hawk for a very Hulk Hogan-esque experience. There's a whole load of different weapons, and the odd very amusing touch indeed. It's always a bit of a laugh when Lee's poor enemies chuck up their breakfast following a particularly vicious smackdown. While the Western Vendetta is probably most famous, you may want to play this as Crime Fighters 2 for a different and less censored experience. Some enemies who like to dry hump as their preferred attack were taken out of the Western version. Either way, it's one of the best arcade beat-em-ups ever. We finished 1991 with Xexex, which I probably haven't pronounced correctly. Out in the West, this game is also known as Orius. I kinda feel sorry for this one, because it is the game that breaks the run of absolute classics we've seen of late. Xexex is just an average Joe, unfortunately. This is another shoot-em-up, one that takes a fair bit of influence from R-Type in that you have an attachment that can shield you as well as be fired around, alongside some tentacles that were also nicked from another IRM shoot-em-up named X-Multiply. The shooting action itself isn't bad, but it's not really the high standard you would expect from Konami. It feels a little derivative, which isn't exactly surprising. It may possibly be your bag, but Thundercross 2 knocks this one out of the park for me. If you're going to play it, I would definitely stick to the Japanese version, because this Western one has certain features taken out that make the game even less varied and even more unfair. For Konami in the arcades, 1992 is most definitely the year of the licensed game. Of the 7 titles we've got from this year, 5 of them are based off another IP. Oh, and naturally they're all bloody good too. Here's the first of them, Asterix. The almighty Gallic duo come to the arcade with another absolutely stunning beat-em-up in terms of presentation. Again, there's been a whopper of an effort by Konami to ensure that Asterix and Obelix aren't just here, but they move exactly as you would expect they would. Indeed, when it comes to the characters, this may well go beyond even the likes of The Simpsons. Every attack, and especially every throw, is put simply, perfect. I don't know how you would go about representing these two any better when it comes to how they deal with all these poor Romans, effortlessly swinging them with one arm, a few slaps followed by a big belly bounce, or a plain and simple kick right up their imperial backside. Truly, this is remarkable. Asterix only had a limited release as a game, but it's one of the best beat-em-ups Konami ever made. Bucky O'Hare is another exceptional Konami licensed belt scroller. This formula just continues to work spectacularly well, with yet more presentation that feels just like the show, including using a bunch of the actual voice actors and taking all sorts of little details from both the show and the original comic, and yet more really good play that's perfect for a group. As befits the franchise, the Bucky O'Hare game is a bit more about firing your blaster than it is about getting up close and personal with enemies, so this is more of a beat-em-up shooter hybrid, something that feels kinda like an evolution of the Aliens arcade. If I were to make a countdown of Konami's 10 licensed efforts from this time period, this probably ends up somewhere in the middle. Generally all of these games are of a really high standard though, so you can hardly go wrong. It should be noted that a whole bunch of folks who made this game, specifically Hiroshi Aiuchi, Tetsuhiko Kikuchi, and Norio Hanzawa, are people who would, just a few months later, split away from Konami to form Treasure. And the licensed fun continues with another absolutely tremendous title, G.I. Joe. Happily, this is a bit different from the normal side-scrolling formula. Essentially, it's a highly improved evolution of Devastators from a few years ago, where your characters are running into the screen, taking down the Cobra troops, and blowing up absolutely everything in sight. Of the few games that can be found in this little niche, the likes of Cabal, Blood Brothers, and the aforementioned Devastators, this might just be the absolute best of them. The only other one I can think of that could compete is Wild Guns. It's the bombastic nature of this game that really puts you in more than anything. Even more so than most of Konami's other licensed efforts, the whopping great explosions and sound effects make this a majorly entertaining title, and surely the best G.I. Joe game by some distance. It is kind of nice to have Hexion up next, mainly because it gives us a little break from all these outrageous action titles, offering up a happy and simple Japan-exclusive puzzler where you're chucking hexagons down a well. It's kind of similar to Tetris in that the objective is to form lines with these hexagons, although naturally they're a bit more zigzaggy due to the nature of the shape. Perfectly acceptable stuff really, the sort of thing you'll probably end up playing for longer than you initially wanted to, and it does feature some cameos for the likes of TwinBee, Pentaru, and the Moya heads. As with the likes of Tetris, Columns, and the later Magical Drop, Hexion isn't an original creation, as it's actually a licensed port of a 1990 PC shareware game called Hextris, made by a student named David Markley. The game proved to be quite popular in offices around Japan, which led Konami to approach Markley and get a license to the title. We've got another pretty big game here. While Mortal Kombat often gets the lion's share of the credit for the big boom in digitised graphics that started in the arcades in 1992, Lethal Enforcers cannot be ignored here. This was also a massive hit indeed, and a game that, just like MK, generated a fair bit of controversy, the two titles complementing each other nicely both in the courtroom and in the cash box. The almighty Patman QC has done a great video all about Lethal Enforcer's creation, which I will link to, but the main inspiration for this game came from the second big Laserdisc game wave that hit arcades in 1990, with big success for shooting gallery games like Mad Dog McCree. Indeed, Konami initially thought about making such a game, but opted for something a bit simpler, and so we end up with this digitised shooting gallery. It may be a bit simple now compared to other games that would follow it, but you can't knock the wonderfully corny voice samples, the appropriately decked out villains, and of course those two luminous justifiers holstered inside the cabinet. Just like that, we're back to licensed titles. This is how we're finishing the year. Wild West Cowboys of Moon Mesa is one of the more obscure ones, mainly because the show itself didn't end up lasting all that long, but Konami still take the opportunity to make a game that is kind of a follow-up to Sunset Riders, only with bovine cowboys filling the chaps of Steve, Kamano and company. Now we've got the likes of Marshall Moo Montana and the Cowlowado Kid. The end result is pretty good, especially in the regular old stages. It feels just like Sunset Riders, complete with some nice stunt sections to go along with the side-scrolling action. My only real complaint is that the boss fights can be a little annoying, mainly because they're mostly big old bullet sponges, so they end up taking way too damn long. Still, it's yet another pretty good licensed effort from Konami, and the whole concept is certainly strange and humorous enough to make a game like this out of. We've got another big licensed one to close out 1992. In fact, this is the last one we're going to see for a while. And of course, it's X-Men. The beat-em-up action returns, this time in a pretty damn serious title that allows you to control one of 6 stars of the show. You can pick from Wolverine, Cyclops, Colossus, Storm, Nightcrawler or Dazzler, and the monstrous deluxe double wide cabinet allows 6 players to control a whole group. This aforementioned cabinet is probably the thing that people remember the most out of X-Men, as it certainly is a sight to behold, but the game itself is good. It certainly doesn't skimp on throwing enemies at you, and there's the odd legendary voice sample kicking about. While my personal preferences certainly take me towards the brighter likes of The Simpsons and Asterix, as opposed to this somewhat greyer title, I do have quite a bit of respect for this stunning arcade, and it is a fine way for the big old Konami licensed arcade game splurt to finish. We start 1993 with something a little different. Gaiapolis is a top-down game, but one that's much more of a hack-and-slasher, complete with the odd little RPG element. Similar in many ways to Namco's Valkyrie no Densetsu, although with a lot more beat-em-up elements, and also pretty good. You've got plenty of fantastical monsters to take out, you level up and have different spells to play with, you get familiars. It's certainly something that's still a bit unusual to see in an arcade, but a lot of these action RPG-esque arcade games are very welcome, and Gaiapolis is no exception. It's certainly not a well-known arcade title, and predictably it never left Japan, but it tends to get some very positive notes indeed nowadays from those who've discovered the title, as it should. Konami don't often miss with arcade games at the moment, but unfortunately we do have a little miss to report on here with the next one. Here's Martial Champion. This is the first fighting game that the company has released into the arcade for quite some time, and the inspiration for this one is kind of obvious. Konami are trying to get a bit of that Street Fighter 2 shine with a rather similar set of characters, similar inputs, and all of that. Indeed, it appears as though this game was initially supposed to be Yaya Kung Fu 2, completely ignoring the age-old computer-only sequel of the same name, before they went for something original. The graphics on the game look excellent, with some very huge sprites indeed, but this falls down everywhere else, especially when playing against the computer, because it's such a blatant and thoroughly annoying cheat. It may not be that bad to look at, but it's really not fun at all to play. Happily, it's not long at all before we get back to some major goodness. We've got 2 absolutely brilliant original beat-em-up titles here in 1993, and the first of them is Metamorphic Force, a game where you play as a group of heroes who can also morph into animals. Essentially, it's the perfect sequel to Altered Beast that's not actually a sequel. Depending on who you choose, you can transform into either a Minotaur, a werewolf, a were-panther, or a were-bear, complete with lots of extra damage and nifty special attacks. The standard here is just what you would expect compared to the other beat-em-ups that Konami have released. Absolutely top level in the graphics and animation departments, while the gameplay is a little bit deeper than what you find in most of the licensed titles, what with the switching between human and beast forms. Of special note here though is the music. What a soundtrack this game has, perhaps one of the best ever heard in an arcade game, with Mariko Egawa and Mutsuhiko Izawa providing some absolutely raging tunes to accompany the action. This is another game that can't really be faulted, and one you absolutely have to play if you're a beat-em-up fan. We did just cover a rather disappointing fighting game from Konami, but happily we've got a much better one here. It's time for Monster Maulers. This is a different sort of fighting game in that it's more like a boss rush. You pick from one of 3 heroes and you have to fight against a whole range of monsters, some of which are based on older Konami enemies such as the Moe Heads and Red Dragon from Gradius, or the Brain from Salamander, and the whole vibe is a tribute to classic Japanese tokusatsu TV shows, meaning the likes of Ultraman, Kamen Rider and what have you. It's a very affectionate tribute to these classics, complete with an appropriately over-the-top intro and excellent music throughout, and the gameplay here is far superior to anything you would find in Martial Champion. During a time when there were a lot of rather unoriginal fighting games kicking around, including Konami's earlier effort, this is something very different and very much worth playing, a real gem from the company's early 90s output. Mystic Warriors is the third game in a rather unofficial trilogy of sorts. You've got Sunset Riders, you've got Wild West Cowboys, and now you've got this one. Indeed, while the setting here is very different, Mystic Warriors is really more of a proper follow-up to Sunset Riders than Wild West Cowboys is, because you've got most of the same team from Sunset Riders working on this, including director Hideyuki Tsujimoto. The game takes Sunset Riders action to a present-day setting, giving you 5 ninjas to choose from and lots of shurikens to chuck about, while a health bar and magic have also been added to the mix. Plus there's a few cheeky references to the team's previous game kicking around, such as when you're fighting in a drive-in theatre as Sunset Riders Attract mode plays. This game may not be as well known as Sunset Riders, but it's just as good. There's still the same mix of brilliant side-scrolling, complete with some other little action set pieces, like skiing down a mountain, and there's more of that lovely music too. Another lesser-known Konami title that you really ought to try out if you haven't yet. Our next 2 games are very similar to each other, but they represent something entirely new. It's Konami's first foray into 3D. Here's Polynet Warriors and Polygonet Commanders, 2 flawed but actually quite likeable titles. Both of these games are basically first-person affairs where you go around an arena trying to take down as many opponents as possible before the time runs out and hitting a quota. It's like a really quick-fire deathmatch. The graphics in the 2 games are obviously very different. Polygonet Commanders is a more city-based tank game, whereas Polynet Warriors is a whole lot cuter, with lovely little forests and appropriately deformed enemies. The controls are different too. Polynet Warriors is more conventional control-wise, while Commanders uses Battlezone-esque tank controls. I actually really like these games despite their flaws. It's kind of simple, and the frame rate is pretty shocking, but I do enjoy the early 3D vibe here, and Polynet Warriors has a very likeable aesthetic indeed. Sadly, these games failed. The jaggy graphics and slow speed meant they weren't really up to snuff with the sort of 3D games that Sega or Namco were putting out. The Polygonet hardware itself is pretty esoteric and is a good example of how long things can take in MAME world. It took 20 years from the time when both these games were originally dumped to the time when they were finally classed as working in the program. Patience is a virtue. There's a great video by MAME dev mainstay the Mogminer all about these games, which I will link to in the description. Welcome to Generic Soccer World. Yes, it's that time when Konami produced an arcade football game that's not a whole lot different from lots of other footy games made by other arcade studios, but hopefully you're ready to pick a country of your choice and get up for the cup and all of that. We do actually have some decent sports games to come from Konami, including football-based ones, but Premier Soccer isn't exactly it. There's one little gimmick here in that you can play the game either with smaller sprites but a much more zoomed out pitch, or you can zoom in for some nice big sprites. Obviously go for the first one. You're much better off seeing who you can pass to rather than being able to make out every player's identical facial features. Other than that, there's not a lot going on here. It's a very typical football game for the time in the arcade, and it's not the sort of thing I can really see myself playing again anytime soon. Also, it gets the flag of Northern Ireland completely and utterly wrong in the worst possible way, which could have potentially been grounds to ban the whole game in that country. Here's our first quiz game that we can't really say a whole lot about because it's all in Japanese, a very traditional inclusion in one of these videos. Quiz Gakumon no Susume appears to have some sort of school theme going on, presumably going through a typical day. It started in homeroom, but naturally I couldn't get any further. So yeah, that's about all you'll get from me here.
Hi.
Run and gun comes from a genre that Konami are typically pretty good at, but here they've actually used the name for a basketball game, and a pretty popular one at that. At the very least, this is the first game of a series of regular old b-ball titles we'll be seeing, as opposed to the street one we saw a little earlier. The viewpoint here is a bit different from the usual side-on view you would expect to see in these games. Instead, it's a third-person type game where the camera's either behind or in front of your player, depending on what end of the court you're running towards. This viewpoint doesn't actually work out too badly, although I think this game's a little slow for the arcade. It's certainly a more realistic affair than usual, but it still gets knocked into a cocked hat by NBA Jam, or some of Data East's later b-ball games like Hoops. 'Tis a little unusual, mind you. "1993 ends on a major high. Now, the bad news is that this game is pretty much the last Konami beat-em-up we'll be looking at. It's been a fantastic and very successful genre for them, but they're going to leave it behind. However, Konami's beat-em-up journey ends with what might just be the best one they've ever done: Violent Storm. While officially this is the third and final game in the Crime Fighters series, this is actually a post-apocalyptic beat-em-up, one with a pretty humorous edge. The music, characters, and particularly some of the animations and things you can do definitely give it a light-hearted touch, almost like it's parodying Fist of the North Star and the like. I mean, hey, Armageddon must be alright if you can pick up a baby pig and it automatically turns into an American football, surely. The gameplay here is deeper than all the other Konami beat-em-ups. You've actually got some very nifty fighting game style special moves at your disposal to go along with the basic attacks and crowd clearing specials, and just like Vendetta, there's tons of weapons to play around with, all very handy. Plus, there's a very marked difference between all the characters. They've all got their quirks, and they've all got their own moves. This also gets top marks in all the expected departments. Outstanding graphics and art, and the music is really great. It's vocal, it's cheesy, and it fits perfectly. Honestly, even though Violent Storm lacks the big name and the success of the major licensed beat-em-ups like TMNT and Simpsons and all of that, it may well be the best of Konami's forays into this genre. It's an absolutely fantastic game indeed, and we're not going to see too many games better than this one in the whole video. An absolute must play.
Crazy punks! Get them out!
May I see your ticket?
1994 begins with a new series of puzzle titles. This game's known in the West as Crazy Cross, but it's the first in a series called Taisen Puzzle-dama, and we'll be seeing a couple of these. This is a competitive puzzle game where you put coins of the same colour together, ideally creating chains in order to send a whole load of dead blocks down the opponent's well. However, these blocks can be made live again if they're part of a connection, which is basically the main difference between this game and something like Puyo Puyo. I do kinda like this edition, as it does make the matches a little bit less of a lost cause. Often in Puyo Puyo, if you get a whole load of dead beans in your well, there's not much you can do to rectify the situation, whereas you have at least got more hope here. I enjoy games like this generally, even if I'm not really the best at them, so this definitely gets a thumbs up from me. We don't have too many games to look at in 1994. Annoyingly, a bunch of them don't really work in MAME. However, we do have the second arcade Parodius title, Gokujou Parodius, which got a Western release under the name of Fantastic Journey and has a subtitle that roughly translates to Pursue the Glory of the Past, picked because Tsukasa Tokuda and the team behind the game wanted this to be an antidote to the fighting games that were swarming the game centres at the time. This title does actually take a few little cues from fighting games, particularly when it comes to expanding the amount of playable characters. There are now 8 you can choose from, with the likes of Bunny Girl Hikaru and Koitsu the Stickman joining Vic Viper, Pentaro and company. But most of the gameplay remains the same, with various weapons and special abilities added, whether it be a big old vertical line of pain or shouting swear words through a megaphone. The shoot-'em-up action is still excellent, of course. You just can't go wrong with a Parodius title, and it's most certainly my favourite Konami shoot-'em-up series because you've got so much creativity in the way of enemies, bosses and stages, and such a great little vibe, with all the renditions of classical music pieces chucked in and what have you. And the best of these games is still to come. Lethal Enforcers 2 Gunfighters takes the popular gun game and goes in a different and actually more appealing direction. We're now in the wild, wild west, taking down outlaws, stopping banks from being robbed, occasionally dueling with varmints, and going through other cliched yet entertaining scenes. The action is much the same as the first Lethal Enforcers, really, but Gunfighters, or the Western if you're in Japan, is more entertaining thanks to the setting and the usual load of cheesy yet funny voice samples, such as "You can hit the bright side of a barn." These may play every 20 seconds or so, but they still don't get old. This was still a very successful game indeed, so the Wild West setting was very welcome, although this would be the last Lethal Enforcers game for a decade. It's quizzing time again. Here's Quiz Do Re Mi Fa Grand Prix. There were actually 3 of these games kicking around from 94, 95 and 96, so it kinda makes sense to just do the 2 of them that I can play right now. I may actually have a slightly higher chance of getting questions right here, as this is a Name That Tune type game, a true test of your J-pop knowledge. Unfortunately, mine is kind of limited to old city pop like Maria Takuchi and Tatsuro Yamashita, plus the song titles are all in Japanese anyway, so I'm still not getting anything here, I'm afraid. Soccer Superstars is a big improvement on Premier Soccer, Konami's previous rather middling footy title. This one takes cues from One and Gun in that we've got a similar camera to that game, and that makes a nice change from the usual side-on action. It's also just generally a whole lot more playable. It features the first instances of cheesy commentary that you'd soon be finding in the International Superstar Soccer titles, and it can also be played by 4 players. The deluxe version of this arcade has 2 screens to accommodate this. It still generally plays like an arcade footy game in that most of your goals are going to come by volleying the ball in off a keeper rebound, but it's totally fine. I'd much rather play something like this over the likes of Super Sidekicks, if I'm honest. We're now moving into 1995, and the next game is Crypt Killer. This is another gun game, although it's one with more of a scary edge. You're guided by this big strange head named Galazon, exploring various tombs and dungeons looking for treasure, and shooting all manner of enemies along the way. It's kinda like Castlevania if the Belmonts had guns instead of whips. This game also takes us back into the 3D world. Although all the enemies are digitised, the environments are 3D. The game's alright as far as shooting galleries go, although in the grand scheme of things it's kind of had all the shine taken off of it by Sega's House of the Dead. That game's very well remembered, whereas this one isn't so much. But still, it's not like there's anything majorly wrong with Crypt Killer. The arcade also comes with a neat shotgun-based take on the Justifier which you would pump for the reload, something that's a bit more satisfying than simply aiming off the screen. I like it. Konami's trying out another fighting game with this next one, and it's another one that's not particularly remembered. This is Dragoon Might. The simplified take on this would be Konami does Samurai Showdown, seeing as this is a weapons-based affair, with a couple of little twists. The button combinations are generally simpler, with a big super attack available using all 3 punch buttons, and you can also press 3 kick buttons to jump and hand from some sort of ledge or rope or other grab point in a stage, which can have its uses. Other than that, is there anything here that would make people choose this over SNK's game? Not really, no. Dragoon Might is definitely a better effort than Martial Champion, with more varied characters and a much less blatantly cheaty AI, but it's still not a fighting game that went anywhere, never leaving the arcade. Pretty average on the whole. Five-a-side Soccer is up next, and this is a simple affair. A single-screen tabletop arcade game that's based around indoor football, one where you use a trackball to move the players around and the buttons to shoot, and the teams all have very specific strengths such as hitting powerful shots or being able to curve the ball wildly. It kind of feels like a simplified version of the age-old and highly influential Tekken World Cup, and it's totally fine for what it is. Definitely something made for 2 players to get a kick out of, almost feeling like an electronic version of table football. Once you get used to the controls here, there's not a whole lot wrong with this casual little footy game. Magical TwinBee, or TwinBee Yahoo, is the third and final game in the TwinBee series to get an arcade release, and it goes out on a pretty damn fine note. It seems kind of murky as to whether this game actually got a release outside of Japan or not, but this is most certainly the cutest of cute-em-ups and the prettiest game in the series to date. The artwork is, once again, absolutely gorgeous. The action itself doesn't change too much aside from offering you a couple of different difficulty levels to choose from, ranging from practice and normal to the special expert difficulty, and also letting you pick between different charged shots, and the core gameplay still has all the bells and whistles you would expect from a TwinBee game. This would also be the last shoot 'em up in the TwinBee line for quite a while. The series would diversify a bit from here with things like simple mobile and pachinko games, as well as dungeon crawling RPGs and Crazy Cross spin-offs. Konami decided to bring an old name back from the past for this next title. This is Midnight Run Road Fighter 2. The original Road Fighter was all about going cross-country and racing against other vehicles on busy stretches of highway and the like, and this new 3D version keeps faithful to that. We're now racing on street circuits that are still chock full of other cars, which you get points for passing in any one of the 4 familiar but unlicensed vehicles that you're able to choose from. Also, you can switch from automatic to manual transmission at any point during a race, which is kind of novel. I suppose the big question is if this can really compete with the sort of racing games that Namco and Sega were putting out there at the time. And while this isn't a bad effort, I'm afraid the answer has to be no. It's just not up there on the graphics and speed front, especially when you consider how smooth the likes of Rave Racer and Sega Rally are. Honestly, it feels more like a PlayStation game than an arcade game. It's just okay.
Watch out! Roadhog straight ahead!
We have the second game in the Taisen Puzzle-dama series up next, or the second arcade game anyway. This one's pretty damn similar to the first really, but it's a crossover with another popular Konami series, that being Tokimeki Memorial, the dating simulation. This game comes the year after the original Tokimeki was released on Super Famicom and became a massive hit, selling over 1 million copies and quickly becoming hugely influential. And while my name isn't Tim Rogers, it's easy to see why this arcade crossover would exist, judging by that level of success. Regardless of the setting and whatnot, there's nothing at all wrong with this if you already enjoy Crazy Cross. It's the same only with Tokimeki's characters, all about creating whopping great chains and filling the opponent's well with crap. Perfectly good fun. Tokimeki Memorial would get an arcade game entirely of its own in 1997, one which features a heartbeat and sweat sensor and gives you a printed postcard once you're finished with it. "1996 is the last year we're covering in full, and we begin with the start of another series. Here we have the first Bishi Bashi title, Bishi Bashi Championship Minigame Senshuken. This only came out in Japanese arcades, although there would later be console Bishi Bashi games available outside Japan on PlayStation. Now the graphics on this are unfortunately a bit screwed up at points in MAME, but the game is still generally playable. It's a whole load of minigames, all of which are based around bashing big coloured buttons, either in an absolute frenzy, or hitting the appropriate colour, or using them to move a car and so on. This is quite the classic party game, obviously meant for 2 or 3 players rather than 1, and it's a good laugh. The only issue of sorts here is that the language barrier can be a bit of an obstacle at times when it comes to figuring out what you've got to do, although a lot of the games are self-explanatory. In this regard, it's a similar experience to something like Sega's Tantar series. Even if the lingo can occasionally be a problem, it's largely still a lot of fun. Daisu-Kiss is another Japanese-only game that, unfortunately, I can't make head nor tail of. It appears to be a cross between a dating sim and a quiz game, apparently with some other mini-games thrown in like this little tug-of-war here, but I can't really go too far past the quizzes for obvious reasons. Artwork is the usual sort of chibi, super deformed stuff, and I presume it's at least a more interesting hybrid than regular old quiz games, but I can't really play it. We've got a pretty good racing game lined up next. GTI Club Rally Côte d'Azur is the first of 4 GTI Club games that were released over the years, and this is also the first Konami arcade game we're seeing on some new and more advanced hardware. The PCB for this game is PowerPC based, and there's a few other games that use this. It's used to decent effect, seeing as this is certainly a better racing title than Midnight Run. One of the cool quirks here is that the track is somewhat non-linear, with plenty of shortcuts that can actually be used no matter what, even if it means putting a cafe and its unsuspecting patrons to the sword with your vehicle. Considering that most arcade racing games are entirely limited to the track and nothing else, this is refreshing, and it's totally fine in all other departments. It also features one of the weirdest Easter eggs you'll find in any arcade game. If you futz around with the gears and hold a button combo down before the race starts, you can change the cars into dogs. Why is such a thing here? Absolutely no idea, but it's good to know that it exists. Now this is kind of a surprising one for me. Hyper Athlete. Now you're likely familiar with this title already. It's International Track and Field, Konami's absolutely fantastic update on their classic athletics game, released for the PlayStation. I must say I didn't realise it got an arcade version. However, it did. This only came out in Japan, and it's pretty much the same game as the PS1 title. It apparently came out the month after the PS1 version hit the shelves, and the only difference is a few little optimisations here and there, such as telling you when you should throw the javelin and whatnot. If you've played International Track and Field, you've already played this, and it's nice to know that the game did have a little spot on an arcade floor, the place where it all began for this series. Konami's 1998 game for the Winter Olympics, Nagano Winter Olympics 98, also got a Japan-only arcade version called Hyper Olympic in Nagano that's largely identical to the PS1 game.
The time rage.
When we did Namco, we covered Aquajet, a jet ski based racing game that I have some very fond memories of. And here we have another one. This is Jetwave, one that's much more based around laps of a course rather than simply getting from A to B. Still, even if the actual racing component might be stronger than it is in Namco's title, it's not exactly as impressive on the graphical front. When it comes to 3D, Konami aren't really in the same technical ballpark as Namco or Sega, so a lot of their mid-late 90s 3D games kind of end up feeling like souped-up PlayStation titles, and that's the case here. With that said, Jetwave is still a pretty good time. It's obviously not going to beat Aquajet for me for various reasons, both technical and nostalgic, but it's a perfectly okay take on jet ski racing, and there aren't a whole lot of those about. It's baseball time! GQ Powerful Pro Yaku 96 is the first arcade installment in a quite popular series for Namco, one that features rather deformed and chubby versions of baseball players running about and whacking the ball, complete with plenty of commentary. The drill here is similar to a lot of other baseball games, although you do get a few more options when it comes to pitching, throwing fastballs or curveballs, change-ups and all of that. Also, you can bash the buttons to make your players run faster. As far as arcade baseball goes, I'd say this plays quite nicely really. I'm never going to be much of a fan, but I've played enough of these to at least recognise a good one when I see it. This would be followed up in 1998 by GQ Powerful Pro EX. In the grand tradition of arcade baseball games, this one appears to be nearly identical to the previous game. Let's Attack Crazy Cross is the proper sequel to the original Crazy Cross or Taisen Puzzle-dama. Still the same idea where you chuck coins down a well, only this time there's a school theme, and there are a couple of additions. You have these Pac-Man-esque blocks that'll change any coin in the line they're on to their colour if they're part of a connection, special coins that can help you out in a pinch by disappearing anything they hit, as well as some evil coins that are simply there to spoil everything because not much can be done about them. The core, where you can change blocks into active coins by making them part of connections and chains, remains the same, and it's certainly possible to get some whopping big chains using this if you plan things out correctly. Or, more accurately, if you just get lucky when things are going a little pear-shaped. The additions are pretty welcome, and this is still an enjoyable competitive puzzler. It's time for another basketball game. Here's Run and Gun 2. The second Run and Gun still keeps the series in the 2D world, and it's very nice looking for that. We've got very big, very detailed and very nicely animated sprites stomping about the court, the camera and general play remains the same, and this game can also be played by up to 4 people on the dual screen version. Again, this is a bit more sim-like and challenging in that regard than the likes of NBA Jam, one where the defense might actually put up a bit more of a fight. And yes, my personal preference does lean more towards simpler and much quicker games like Midway's title. Still, this is okay, and the quarters do go by a little bit faster than they did in the first title at any rate. This would be the last 2D b-ball game from Konami. Their next arcade game in the genre would be NBA Play-by-Play, a 3D effort complete with an official license that's essentially a souped-up version of their PS1 line of basketball games, NBA In the Zone. Happily, we've got a couple of excellent shooters up next, starting with Salamander 2. Believe it or not, 10 years have passed since the original game and this sequel, and while Salamander 2 isn't drastically different in the gameplay department, it doesn't really need to be. What we've got here is an exceptional playing and looking game, still flying the flag for 2D shoot-em-ups at a time when so many other things are turning towards 3D, with stages that are both horizontal and vertical, and the typical body horror salamander themes. It may not necessarily feel like a game from 1996, but that's not exactly a bad thing. It doesn't push any boundaries, but it does still play pretty well in my view. Other people and magazines were apparently a little sniffier about this one though, because of how similar it is to the original game. And sure, it's not exactly going to unseat the original Salamander from its pedestal. Still a nice slice of arcade shmupping though. The next Parodius game is, admittedly, perhaps of more interest. It may be the best one in the whole series, after all. Sexy Parodius, the 5th title, features the usual mix of weird ships for you to play as, although Pentaro takes a break for this instalment. Vic Viper, Hikaru, Koitsu and other favourites are all still here though. The game's artwork, as befitting the name, is a little bit more risque than the previous Parodius titles, although not really to any extreme level. It's still very playful indeed, and we've got more cool additions to the gameplay. Mission-style stages where you've got to do your best to meet a quota of sorts, whether it's picking up coins or taking down certain enemies, the usual big bosses and music, a Pac-Man-esque creature named Alex who'll go around eating enemy ships for you. This is bloody great. I'd say it's a pretty close one thing between this or Jikyo Oshiberi Parodius on Super Famicom when it comes to picking my favourite Parodius game. Both are top of the class, but I just love this series in general. Not too long after the first, here's the second Bishi Bashi game. This is Super Bishi Bashi Champ, and as you can imagine, it's more strange minigames based around bashing buttons in several different ways. The copyright is a little odd for this one. The original 3-player version of this game came out in 1996, but a 2-player version is also out there. However, it appears as though that didn't come out until 1998. Happily, this one does have slightly less glitched out graphics when played in MAME, which is handy. And other than that, most of what I said on the original Bishi Bashi applies here, in that the games generally are quite fun, although the language barrier may prove to be a little challenging at points. It doesn't really matter a whole lot because most games just involve pressing the buttons wildly anyway, ideally trying to do it faster than your opponents. When you combine this with the absolutely lovely looking cabinets, you can see why these games were so popular in game centres. We've got another Tokai Puzzle-dama, or Crazy Cross game, up next, Taisen Tokai Puzzle-dama. Now this is a series that can get quite confusing indeed. We saw Let's Attack Crazy Cross from this series a few entries ago, and that's thought of as a proper sequel. However, this one is more of a spin-off, and that's before you think about all the other spin-off Crazy Cross games that were released like the Tokimeki Memorial one, or console spin-offs for things like TwinBee and the Chibi Maruko-chan manga and anime. There is a big difference here, at least. In this spin-off, you change the colour of coins that are already in the well, rather than the coins dropping down. This one is very familiar, the graphics are a bit stronger, for whatever that's worth, and still a good competitive puzzling laugh, although it is odd that it came out after the previous game we've seen, and yet is actually more like the first title. Hey ho. Versus Net Soccer is kind of an odd one. This is another sports game, obviously, and it's another one that can be played by up to 4 players, with a dual screen version. However, it does feel a bit past it for late 96, it must be said. We've got 3D, but we've also got 2D sprites, and that just feels a bit ropey for the time when you consider there's the likes of Sega's Virtua Striker kicking about, or indeed Konami's Winning Eleven 2, the game that would later get released internationally as ISS Pro, and that's a PS1 game. It doesn't play badly, but it does feel very unimpressive for the arcade. It doesn't help that the graphics do get quite screwed up here in MAME, but the general concept is disappointing. It's worrying times when an arcade game doesn't look nearly as impressive as console contemporaries. The final game from 1996 is another racing title. This is Winding Heat. This is basically the sequel to last year's Midnight Run, where you've got more street tracks to play around in, and you've also got a lot of cars to choose from. There's over a dozen kicking around here, and you should be able to recognise more than a few of them. Hell, there's even a take on the Unos Roadster, a car that's quite important in the history of Namco's Ridge Racer. The game itself is an improvement over Midnight Run. Certainly the courses are better, and the amount of cars is definitely welcome, although I would still say that Côte d'Azur is by far the best of the Konami 3D racers that we've seen to date. Not bad at all though. Right. We've covered everything that I could play from 1990 to 1996. So why are we stopping here and not going through the rest of the 90s in the same way? Well, things do get a bit tricky at this point. Not for any bad reasons, mind you. Indeed, we're coming to a time when Konami are about to get even more commercial success on the arcade floor. They'll be a dominant force. It's just that annoyingly, it's not that easy to show this simply through MAME. Now, a common problem in the late 90s for arcade games is that the home systems are most definitely catching up. Certainly a lot of the 3D titles we've seen from Konami so far haven't usually been too much further beyond what could be found on PlayStation. Konami did, however, have a solution. Not to make arcade games that were technically superior, but games that had very novel control systems. We've kind of seen that already with the likes of Bishi Bashi, but late 1997 is when we see the release of the first Beatmania game. This is essentially the beginning of Konami's Beatmania line, and it's responsible for a boom in music games. The control itself is an emulation of a DJ's turntable, complete with keys, and it just doesn't feel the same in MAME, which is kind of the point. This is something you cannot recreate in the home. Now sure, there were home versions of Beatmania, but obviously these were going to need their own special controller, so that's a big extra when it comes to the price. Not that it mattered, because this game was freaking massive. The original Beatmania alone shifted 25,000 arcade units, and that's before you go into the quite staggering amount of games there are in the 2DX series. All this, of course, also applies to 1998's Dance Dance Revolution, another arcade juggernaut that shifted tens of thousands of units and then sold well over 1 million in the home. These two in particular are incredible series. Konami still release new DDR and 2DX games today, and it would obviously be foolish for me not to mention them, even if I can't really do them justice. Much like Beatmania, DDR's home success was monstrous, and obviously that also needed a special controller to have any chance of replicating the game properly. Let's face it, dance is right there in the title. To a lesser extent, but usually still successful, we have the likes of Guitar Freaks, Drum Mania, Bass Angler, Pop and Music, all games that are kind of hard to experience properly when you're just sodding around in MAME due to their very unique controls. All titles that promote a different and more physical arcade experience that was very welcome indeed. These games make up the lion's share of what Konami released onto the floor in the late 90s, and they were very successful with it. There are other games of interest for sure, although sadly a lot of these titles, games such as 3D Cute-em-up to be Polystars, 3D gun game Total Vice, and 3D Fighter Battle Twist, don't work all that well in MAME yet. Hopefully someday they will. But these things cannot be rushed. Still, with all this said, I have picked out 3 games from 97, 98 and 99 respectively that I couldn't not cover. So even if the coverage of Konami's late 90s is incomplete for now, these games certainly make for a better finish than something kind of obscure like Winding Heat. And so, without any further blabbering, let's have a crack at the following awesome trio: Solar Assault, Gradius IV for Katsu, and Silent Scope. Solar Assault is a new direction for the world of Gradius, albeit a kind of short-lived one. In fact, it would be more accurate to describe it as a spin-off. This is Gradius, only in rail shooter form. It's fully 3D, and we are now behind the ship, moving through obstacles and taking down enemies. Even with this, it's not wildly different. You've still got the Gradius power-up system, you've got familiar enemies in recognisable patterns, the usual boss fights, and the usual ships. Vic Viper, Lord British, and Alfinia have all come to play. Doing this sort of thing isn't wholly new, really. We already saw Namco do this with Solvaloo and Galaxian 3. And this is, well, it's just okay, to be honest. It's an interesting take on things, but there's not a whole lot here that would make you want to play this over a plain old damn good Gradius game. And so it's not all that surprising that this would be the series' only flirtation with rail shooter land. And guess what we've got next? Yes, we have a thoroughly old-fashioned Gradius game. Sort of, anyway. This is Gradius IV for Katsu from 1998, a Japanese-only title, and technically the first proper sequel in the series since 1989's Gradius III, or rather the first numbered sequel in a while. Unfortunately, this isn't necessarily the best of the Gradius games. It's still got the classic side-scrolling view, although polygons have been added into the mix for the first time. This certainly feels new, but while the graphics aren't too bad and it still moves smoothly, polygons don't necessarily improve the game. The shoot-em-up action is still here, of course, as is the difficulty level. Just like the old days, the default game will not let you continue unless you change some options. But 3D graphics aside, it's not exactly pushing boundaries. Although this is considered a proper sequel, I don't think anybody would pick it over the PS1 only Gradius Gaiden that came out in the previous year. Our final game comes from 1999, and it's one of my arcade favourites. One of the last games I remember hugely enjoying before I largely stopped going to arcades regularly, and one that I do still see in arcades today from time to time. Here's Silent Scope. This one isn't playable in MAME yet, so I'm using the PS2 version, which I've also played a bunch of over the years. This is a gun game with a twist, one where you're a sniper, you have an appropriate rifle to stare down the scope with, and you've got to protect your quarry. And of course, there's a tight time limit to worry about. It kind of feels like a spin-off of other time-conscious gun games like Time Crisis, and admittedly I did think this was a Namco game for quite some time when I was younger. Now, playing this with a controller is nothing whatsoever like playing the arcade, but I loved this game back then, and I still love to play it whenever I see it. It's definitely got that great sniper feeling about it. Certainly different to the Golgo 13 game that we saw in the third Namco vid, in that it's a lot more action-packed with more than just one target to hit, but both are pretty damn effective. One other quite curious thing about the Silent Scope series is that there is an SWP version of the later Silent Scope EX game called Silent Scope Fortune Hunter, where you can earn cash prizes based on your performance. That to me is pretty damn unusual, although I would imagine there's quite a few differences here that would stop some expert player just rocking up, smashing through the game and getting a jackpot. I would imagine, anyway.
Calm down. Calm down. Calm down.
And with that, we're actually finished for real. Even if we've not fully covered every Konami arcade game from the 1990s, simply because such a thing would be kind of unfeasible for various reasons, whether it's games that can't be played or having to look at an outrageous amount of Beatmania and DDR variations that don't differ too much aside from songs, and can't be played all that well in MAME anyway. As ever, I hope you've enjoyed this look back, and that you've found some cool Konami games here. Not necessarily the ones that everyone knows already, but ones that you may not have played before or even heard of. Thanks so much for watching, and until the next time, bye for now.